Hey guys, this is Yoshi from Neverwinter Uncensored. It's Sunday evening, I have a cup of tea. It's time to talk some Neverwinter on our podcast episode 2. And in case you're new to the format, which is very likely since it just started, our Neverwinter Uncensored podcast, or Uncast, is a bi-weekly format that features all the stories, news and general talk about your favorite game. Today I'll be doing the podcast alone again, which has a fairly simple reason. My weekend simply was a bit crowded and I literally didn't know until like 10 minutes ago that I would be recording the podcast right now. So obviously it's hard to bring people in on such a short notice, but even if, I wouldn't have been able to set everything up on the technical side. By the way, thanks to all of you that provided feedback and encouragement after the first episode. One thing, still working on bringing the podcast to Stitcher and iTunes, but for now I'll be uploading the episodes to SoundCloud. I'll add the links in the description below and also on the corresponding blog post that will get released with this podcast. So you guys will have an audio-only version and different platform to listen to the podcast. Alright, so let's get to the topics today. First and foremost, I have to apologize. Last week on the blog, I promised that we would move on from Huntgate and that last Monday would be the last day that we would talk about the incident. And boy, I was wrong. Because there's just so many stuff coming in over the week, so I really have little choice but to cover the latest news, and then I also have 2 or 3 more things I'd like to touch on regarding Huntgate. I don't think there's really anybody that doesn't know what Huntgate is, but if that's the case, just Google Neverwinter Huntgate and you'll find all the articles that describe what happened. First thing I want to talk about is throughout the week we learned more details on who got banned and what the basis of the bans was. And there's actually kind of a funny anecdote, I guess, because people that got permabans contacted support to ask them whether there's a chance that the ban could be lifted. And one thing that players tried were offering support to strip at least the exploited ADs. Support then answered, the ADs doesn't matter. What matters is that you broke the terms of service almost 1,000 times. Your account will remain banned. As your account will not be released and we cannot offer further information, this ticket will be closed and no further correspondence sent. So what they actually did was treat every exploited hunt as one infraction of the terms of service. I mean, guys that ran like thousands of bugged hunts probably would have been banned anyway, but it's kind of a weird explanation. And I'm not as fond of real life comparisons, but imagine you shot a guy. You show up on court and the judge says, well, you're here because you're accused of murder in 5 cases. And then you're like, what? I only shot one guy. Yeah, says the judge, but you shot 5 bullets. Each was lethal. So that's 5 individual cases of murder. And I mean, that's kind of funny. I mean, not getting shot, of course, but that they would treat every hunt as single infraction, no matter of how much currency or other stuff there was actually exploited that way. So this might explain why people that felt that they didn't gain too much advantage out of exploiting are still permanently banned. One of the bigger names that got caught up in the whole Huntgate and mass banning apparently is YouTuber FNHuser57. He remained silent for a long time, so people already wondered what's up there. He then released a video a couple days ago where he stated that he's suspended and hasn't been released yet and still waiting for an email. The assumption already was that he received a perma because at the time he released the video, the 7-day suspensions should have already been lifted, which means if he still was banned, then it most likely was a perma. And some tweets of folks now indicate that's actually the case. Some friends of his, guildies, put out an in-game message urging players to contact support and ask them to release him. It's really a sad story. I mean, you can argue about the circumstances, but losing such a major content creator is always bad for the game. FNH user 57 was one of the originals. He streamed the game every week, put out YouTube content, so huge shout out, and if the ban stands, he will be missed. Of course, I don't know to what extent he exploited hunts, but he said that he was caught up in the whole thing and that it was his first infraction and that he has streams to prove it. But his streaming might actually be the issue here, because Perfect World really came down hard on those that streamed the exploit, and it doesn't even seem to matter as much whether or not you knew what was going on, so that could be what triggered the perma and not just a suspension. If you want to support FNH user 57, you can use the hashtag #FreeThePlayers or free FNH user 57. There's also still the hashtag Don'tBuyZen, which was initiated by Nova, so that's your choices to show support on the social platforms. Talking about choices, Huntgate also led to some players trying to establish an alternate subreddit. As you know, the official sub for the game is tightly moderated and very restrictive, and the new sub can be found under neverwinteronline. That's just one word, neverwinteronline, without any spaces. The new sub allows more open talk about the game without the fear of the banhammer. They still will look after toxicity, but you can very well talk about the bans and implications there, for example. So in case you like the Reddit as platform, but don't feel like the official sub is a place where you can talk the game the way you want, then you have an additional option now. This has been tried in the past, by the way, to no avail, but the current team at Neverwinter Online seems to be willing to put in the work to make it work. And if you want to support them, which I would highly encourage to, spread the word, because of course the new sub can't be promoted on official platforms for obvious reasons. What can be promoted on official platforms, however, and this is really, this is really one of the things that drive me nuts. What can be promoted on official platforms, apparently, is talk about the exploit in case the overall topic is supportive towards the company. I mean, the Reddit has deleted threads about the ban wave and exploit left and right in the last days. But suddenly a thread is allowed that bashes those that bash the company. The thread in question is titled, "It disgusts me how players blame Cryptic for the exploit." And the poster went on using several curse words aimed at exploiters. The dude has a valid opinion. That's, I'm all for letting people speak their mind. But it's interesting because most critical talk was silenced on the sub. In fact, in the thread, some critical comments were deleted as well. But now, suddenly, talking the exploit and ban wave in a way that bashes the community is perfectly fine. The reason why they themselves officially don't allow negative talk is because according to them it doesn't add value to a discussion and just incinerates. Frozen Fire, the new mod on Art Games, had a pretty big post explaining that last week. He isn't a moderator on the Reddit, but they act on the same principles. Now please tell me how this adds any value to the discussion and doesn't incinerate the topic. This is a quote. Stop being such a little curse word and don't exploit next time. If you're going the easy way through exploits, you get your curse word handed down to ya. If that's not the definition of double standards, then I don't know. In the meantime, there's also some talk that Microsoft might refund players that got banned. People apparently took it to their support and got money back, so if you've been banned on Xbox, you might as well try that. Not sure that's legit, however. There was one poster on the subreddit that claimed he got money back and that people should try it. I mean, it's worth a shot, I guess. And one last thing. This was a big story for the game, and you could tell because major news outlets picked up the ban wave on their sites, which really rarely happens. Neverwinter is not a big game, so sites like massivelyop.com and others usually only report press releases and such, but this made the news. And Perfect World apparently issued a statement to some sites, and the statement says, players were notified about the exploit and abuse consequences via an official statement from our community manager on the ArcGames forums, which was also replicated on Reddit. Exploits such as this can negatively impact the health of Neverwinter and affects all its players. The exploit is now fixed. Players who chose to abuse the hunt system were in violation of our terms of service, so action was taken against them. Any players who would like to dispute actions against their account may contact our customer service team. To me, this sounds too much like they warned players in advance and then banned those that would still exploit after that. Which obviously is not what happened. The day the devs warned players was the day the exploit got fixed. And unfortunately some sites just picked up the statement and also made it sound like a Perfect World was very transparent with the process, when it was quite the opposite. Not sure this was intended, but it's at least a very corporate view / statement on what happened. That being said, it didn't prevent Huntgate from becoming a complete PR disaster. Other sites did report on the incident by highlighting all facts and also pointing out that the community is very much up in arms. And of course, like every major YouTuber made a video that more or less is critical of Perfect World. But with that, let's move on from the news and let me add some general comments on the whole thing. Because I feel like some stuff needs to get pointed out here. And first of all, some people seem to feel it's important to point out that Cryptic isn't to blame because the bans were handed out by Perfect World. And that's not wrong, but at the same time it's also nonsense. And let's get the facts right here. Cryptic Studios is owned by Perfect World and develops the game. Perfect World operates as publisher and as such handles billing, sales, marketing and also customer service. So people that say the bans were carried out by PWE are absolutely right. Cryptic probably did know that bans were coming and helped support investigate, but it seems like they were not briefed on the extent or specific accounts that were targeted. So alright, that's fine. But how the company is structured internally might be relevant on the corporate side. But the players got banned from Neverwinter, the game. And they naturally blame the devs, quote-unquote devs. And whether or not those devs work at Cryptic or PWE is completely irrelevant to them. It's also such an easy excuse, to be honest, because that's basically why you can't post any support related stuff on the official message platforms. Because what they say is, well, we can help you here at Cryptic, you have to contact support at PWE. Now players don't get that. They get banned from Neverwinter. And then can't, on the Neverwinter message board, post about it, right? That doesn't make sense. Of course, you can delete everything and then point to the fact that support is located elsewhere. But you know what you also could do? Open a support forum on the message board where those PWE employees and support members answer questions. And if I was Cryptic, I would even go and demand that. I would go to Perfect World and say, well, if you think that banning on a Friday, when you are not in office the whole weekend and nobody can get their tickets resolved, if you think this is such a great idea, how about you deal with the rage yourself? Because we at Cryptic, our mods are put into the line of fire every time you mess up. Didn't you say that banning on Fridays wouldn't happen any longer? Well, guess what? Here's our own forum on the message board. We'll redirect the players there for questions. Have fun! Not that Perfect World as their owners have to comply, but anyway. This argument that you can't blame Cryptic because it was handled or mishandled by PWE is not a concept that players understand, and neither should they accept it. We also did have lively discussions with many players, with members of our community. Some were heated, but I personally enjoyed the exchange, although sometimes we had to agree to disagree. I hope, though, people realize that by being available for such exchanges, we do walk the walk. We often say that we cover the game in an honest way to hold the devs accountable. If they mess up, somebody has to point fingers, and since you can do it on the official message platforms, here we are. At the same time, just like we keep an eye on the devs, our community holds us accountable, which is equally fair and important. One thing that did annoy me though was that people threw at me personally or the side, I don't know, that we had to grow up or man up about our responsibilities. Guys, we are always there to talk, just saying. You can contact us on our Discord or message board, leave a reply on the blog, DM us on Twitter or Facebook, whatever. You will get an answer. We're here on most days. We're answering our critics. We do not only talk about transparency, we are as transparent as we can. So if anybody has to quote-unquote man up, it's definitely not us. Because I guess it's obvious who hasn't answered the community about Huntgate yet. Phew, okay, that's like 15 minutes on Huntgate. That has to do it for the topic. I won't promise this time that I'll never talk or write about Huntgate again, because that didn't work the first time. So maybe let's not try it again. Moving on to Mod 15. So I can't cover all features on a single podcast, of course, and I don't intend to. We will have extensive coverage on the blog already, and I'd also like to bring in people on the pod that have spent way more time than myself on the preview shard. However, there's one specific thing I'd like to talk about today, and that's the K-Team Challenge and the Tales of Old. So on the last episode I was talking about my concerns that the module could be light on content, and that especially the endgame and hardcore players would really be looking at a serious drought. I guess Huntgate partially took care of that, because most are banned now. Oh god, I didn't even last a full minute without mentioning Huntgate again. Oh boy, okay. Content drought. Still concerned, but I think this new K-Team Challenge and Tales of Old event format could really help in that regard, especially the Tales of Old. Quick recap about both new systems. K-Team Challenge comes from the new Acquisitions Incorporated campaign and is basically a quest that tasks players to complete a dungeon that rotates weekly on a so-called hardcore mode. In this mode, the team only gets one life. So if any player dies, the whole party has to start over. Okay, so thinking about it, it might also be that whenever a player dies, you can't revive him. Maybe it's first wipe and not first death. But anyway, you get the concept. So parties for this type of challenge obviously have to be built a little differently. I mean, nowadays players hardly care about deaths, right? On endgame, it rarely even happens. But even if, unless you're fighting a boss, there's not even consequences. But in a hardcore mode, and I do kind of hope that this is not deaths, but actually downs, it would mean that any time a player is reduced to 0 health, you can't revive. So that player is lost for the entire remaining run. So teams that want to succeed in the K-Team Challenge would need to be built more around protection, damage reduction and healing. This could actually lead to some interesting setups that are vastly different from what you see on your daily farm runs. And of course it all depends on the rewards. If the K-Team Challenge doesn't hand out sufficient rewards, then nobody will do it. Also, coming back to the death versus downs, if it's actually deaths, then it's not much of an enticing format, to be honest, because endgame teams run around with hundreds of scrolls anyway, and that way you can hardly die at all. Otherwise, imagine Castle Ravenloft or even some easier dungeons when you can't actually go down a single time. That would at least be interesting as challenge and give players some sort of headache. Also, it naturally makes a larger variety of builds viable for the format. That to some extent also happened with the random queue, because it enforces like the 1 healer, 1 tank and 3 DPS setup. So teams could obviously not take their usual Guardian Fighter, Oathbound Paladin and 2 DCs and then just 1 DPS, but had to include more DPS, which was beneficial for some toons that had otherwise trouble getting into groups. The only thing that I have on the con side here is that this doesn't make the dungeons themselves harder. So whenever players will have figured out the meta for the K-Team Challenge, the fun is probably over, because then you'll see the perfect setup for those challenges spread and it'll just become part of your farm routine. So actual design dungeon challenge can't be replaced by sort of quote-unquote house rules, how to run the dungeons. But this being a new way to run content is, at least for keeping players interested and engaged, probably as good as designing a completely new dungeon. Which kinda brings us to the Tales of Old, because this new event series will bring back new dungeons, at least for those that haven't been around before Module 6. The Tales of Old will be the second new way to run dungeons in Module 15. It's an event series that brings back all dungeons in a competitive PvE mode, and the first set of dungeons will be Frozen Heart, Dread Vault, Lair of the Mad Dragon and Throne of Idris. Now, Frozen Heart is already in the game as leveling dungeon, so all players should know it, but the other 3, Throne of Idris, Lair of the Mad Dragon and Dread Vault, were removed in Elemental Evil Module 6 and never seen since. So I guess for most players this will be brand new content. Throne of Idris and Lair of the Mad Dragon were part of the original Tier 1 set of dungeons, and Dread Vault was, in the vanilla version of the game, the capstone dungeon. I mean, the best loot dropped from Castle Never back in the day, but Dread Vault was the most difficult dungeon. So I'm kind of interested whether they will include the original design, because Dread Vault was long and they shortened other dungeons that they brought back. So, we'll have to wait and see how these dungeons will look like. But overall, this is good news because it's new content and longtime players in the meantime are at least going to take a trip down memory lane. Second, it's not only brand new dungeon content. Tales of Old will also introduce the second new way to run dungeons, which is a competitive PvE mode. On the blog I described it as a mix of the World of Warcraft Mythic Plus system and the Neverwinter Combat League, but you could also probably add an arcade mode here, because here's how the whole thing works, and I really hope I get this right based on what Thomas Voss said in the Q&A session with Nova. Tales of Old is an event that brings back one old dungeon at a time. Players have a certain amount of time, probably like an hour or so, and a certain amount of lives to get through the dungeon as often as possible. With each run, the difficulty and rewards increase. Also, just rushing through the content apparently is not the best approach. Instead, you have to collect so-called power-ups that add lives or time. So what teams have to do is actually explore side areas of dungeons, because the assumption is, or I guess that was what Thomas said, that this will be where the best power-ups can be found. So there is a intended exploratory aspect to the whole event. And since the event gets its own vendor as well, I think the Tales of Old will drop its own currency for which you can buy special rewards, just like it was the case with the Neverwinter Combat League. So this is basically a PvE season, and I really hope we get some sort of leaderboard where the best teams and number of completions and times are listed. Because quite honestly, we mainly have talked about a competitive system for PvP, but for PvE it's equally important. The game doesn't have raids, it doesn't come with a true hardcore dungeon challenge, so if Tales of Old is what I think it is, it could actually provide a means for the players and teams and guilds to race against each other in an event format. This, by the way, is what players have been doing anyway, because PvE Endgame Challenge has always been about speedrunning, getting the fastest completion. It was never about being able to complete a dungeon, because even new ones are pretty much instantly mastered on preview already. So Tales of Old naturally seems to extend something that players were doing anyway to measure themselves. And also, coming back to the different team setups and the viability of more builds, will we see movement-based speed teams in the Tales of Old? It's a possibility. It's about speed, it's about getting those power-ups, so at least when the challenge will still be moderate during our first runs, why not switch to a faster loadout? Overall, the K-Team Challenge and Tales of Old could become the content filler I was hoping for. Like I said, I'm still concerned because much depends on the rewards and how it'll be structured, of course, but this really got me excited a little bit. I'm looking forward to it, and that's why I wanted to get this into the podcast today, because some tension with that whole Huntgate thing again, so this more positive aspect of MUD 15 is a nice contrast. And let me take a look. So we are actually close to 30 minutes now, so I think that'll do it for today. Please comment on all things Huntgate below, and also whether you like the K-Team Challenge and the Tales of Old. As always, I'm going to post this podcast on our blog. You can comment there as well, or join us on Discord, social media, or our own message board. With that being said, I'm out for today. I hope you guys enjoyed episode 2 of our Uncensored podcast, and see you guys in 2 weeks. Don't watch your wish and count down many